Kia ora koutou, Marky here again. I'm in my fancy studio, as you can tell. So for those of you that are new to this channel, or who maybe have been watching some of my kind of landscapey, outdoorsy videos, what you probably will learn fairly fast, but I'm going to tell you anyway, is that this channel is rough as old Nick, really. No slick production, no slick anything. It's me usually talking very spontaneously, full of ums and ahs and pontifications and going off on tangents and losing my thread and all those kind of things, because I started to kind of do videos in a very rehearsed kind of way, and then I found that I didn't make very many videos, and also this is to do with the fact that I have ADHD, among other things. ADHD often goes with autism, and if you're interested, I've done another Q&A series of videos on ADHD. So anyway, to get back into it, thank you again for the people that asked questions. Now this is part two. So in part one, which I didn't prepare, I have actually done a mild bit of preparation for this video. Part one I didn't, okay. So I've actually put down in the description a thank you to all the people that have asked questions. And I've got a list of the unanswered questions with me. Look at this. This is as organised as this channel gets. I like to think it's kind of full of content but with no style. That's the way I kind of look at it. Or maybe there is a style. Maybe it's kind of just a natural, homely style. And I kind of get that. Some people will. Most people would probably hate it because we like slick professional productions and we're used to that. But I also like to think that some people will like it and settle in and will become friends. So, okay, questions to answer. So Gwendoline Keown is the channel. Look it up. It's a fantastic channel. I may be biased. Incidentally, all the people who I've put their names down as a thank you for the questions. Many of them have YouTube channels, so if you want to show them some love, go on there, subscribe, give them a like, all that kind of thing. Not all of them. So obviously people have a YouTube profile, but they don't necessarily put content and put videos up there. So obviously everybody on there's got a YouTube profile. Some will have a channel with videos on and some won't, but please do give them some love. And I've also been asked, people keep asking me to do shout outs, and I'm kind of I don't know about that. I'm sure YouTube will kind of punish me for doing that, but I will do a couple of shout outs. Now I think more than 3 people have actually asked me. Somebody called NBA Highlights and another channel called Faded have asked me to do shout outs, so I will do that, and I'll put a link to their channel or to one of their videos in the description box below. But yeah, I'm not really sure about this shout out malarkey. I like it when people give me shout outs, and I like to support other people, but you do have to be quite careful, because YouTube have got a thing about anything relating to artificially trying to get subscribers or views or anything like that. They want you to do it purely, they don't mind you saying please subscribe, please like, and that kind of thing, but they don't like you kind of doing any kind of horse trading or bargaining or any monkey business to go around generating that. And I think shout-outs might come into that category, so I hope I don't get into too much trouble for that, but I said I would do it, so I will. Okay, so Gwendoline Keown is the full name of the channel. That name seems very familiar. I think this person seems almost like somebody I might know. The biggest misconception about autistic presentation. Okay, that's a really good question. There's lots. There's so many misconceptions. That's why it's such a good topic to demystify. Probably eye contact. Okay, and I've done a whole video on this. I've done a series of videos for people with autism, social skills, and I've done some quite blunt and direct talking around do's and don'ts and things like that. So often people with autism have an issue around eye contact. Is that they don't kind of really see a need for it, because in the way that they often don't get a lot of facial and non-verbal communication. They don't kind of understand it. They don't think, why would you need to look at someone when you're talking to them? Because they're not reading the body language in the same way that, this is a generalisation, of course. So sometimes people on the autistic spectrum make zero eye contact, but that is people kind of make too much of these things. It's little bit like fetal alcohol. FASD. I always used to call it something different, but they've changed the name, and I could never quite get my head around. So fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So it's another spectrum. That's sometimes comes with certain facial characteristics, but actually the facial characteristics are in the minority. The minority of people that have FASD have these facial characteristics, but still people will insist on saying, oh, they can't have FASD because they haven't got the facial characteristics, which is obviously it's a nonsense way of looking at it. So people in the same way will say, oh, I don't think they're autistic because they make eye contact. So some people on the autistic spectrum have learned, and picked up, and this is something I've talked about in a video, that eye contact is a good thing and they'll learn to do it. Sometimes they become starey Marys and kind of frighten the living daylights out of everybody by giving too much eye contact. Or sometimes, people's social skills and people's traits vary because of the uniqueness of autism, and particularly pathological demand avoidance syndrome, which is another form of high function. It's a high functioning form of autism presentation, which is different to the Asperger's type presentation, and it's very controversial diagnosis, but I firmly believe that this exists, and I've done videos on it. So if you're interested in that, look up my videos on PDA, which is what it's shortened to. PDA people often they are people, and I count myself as one of these. People are very surprised that they're autistic. They don't recognise autism because generally the social skills are better. Okay, but to cut a long story short, misconception. A misconception is that things like, oh, he made eye contact with me, therefore he can't be autistic. That's a kind of classic one, and there's loads more. I might think of some more later if we've got time. We've got all the time in the world because I can make as many parts of this video as I like. But we'll see. We might cover that in this one or in another one. Okay, so kicking it with Lynn. Hi, Lynn. I'm not sure if this was a question, because it wasn't a question mark and it read more like a statement, but I think there's a question in here. So I'm going to, Lynn, if you didn't intend to ask me a question, you kind of have, because I've drawn a question from your words. What does a person with autism go through? I love this question. Even if it wasn't intended as a question, and it's really interesting. I maintain, I think masses of people on the autistic spectrum, or neurodiverse people in general, and I've got other videos to talk more about what neurodiversity is. So basically, autism is a subset of a bigger grouping of that we would call neurodiversity, which includes things like ADHD and dyslexia. Often things that cluster together. So I think people with neurodiversity, but probably especially with autism, because autism, often, very commonly does have massive social effects, will become traumatized, and they become traumatized. I like to call it social trauma, because it's being accepted by one's peers is immensely important to human beings. It's to lots of other animals, and I think I'm a great lover of evolutionary psychology, and I think to be the reason why people have such social anxiety and have such a thing about fitting in and not saying the wrong thing and all that kind of thing is it goes back to a very real threat that if you were back in the dawn of humanity, if you offended and were thrown out of your community, you probably wouldn't live very long. You'd probably come to a nasty end. You'd probably be made a slave by another tribe, or eaten by a predator, or come to a pretty sticky end. So social, but being able to bond with other people and feel a sense of belonging is really important. And people with autism often struggle enormously with that. And some people think, well, you know, does it matter? Because, you know, often they're loners and they're people that kind of, you know, want to kind of do their own thing and paddle their own canoe. And well, yes, that's partly true, but it's kind of, you know, it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? Are they loners because of the autism, or has the autism made social connection difficult for them, therefore they become loners? I would guess probably 50-50. But even loners, even loners like to belong. You know, we you know, somebody wants to spend their time, because I mean the bottom line is, you know, I talked about this in other videos on other topics, is I think every human being, even the ones that are more antisocial like me, there's always an ambivalence around people. It's like, you know, we are a gregarious species, so even loners like to belong, I think. So so I think this is one of the, you know, the experiences of being autistic. The other experience, I think, common with autistic people is because we see the world often in a very different way, we can think that everybody else is crazy. That's quite a common one. I think and autistic people adapt in different ways. So I've talked about how some autistic people are wallflowers and some autistic people are bulldozers. So I think some people with autism have learnt to be very forceful and develop a very forceful personality, and that kind of enables them to kind of get by socially, even though they might be in some ways, you know, kind of quite boring to be around or quite difficult to be around. If they have a, you know, a little bit of charisma, they can kind of get away with, you know, that strong personality and that railroading kind of thing. And I think one of the interesting things about being autistic is, and guys, again, I'm you know, in this video, I guess for the most part, I'm talking about high functioning autistic people, which would include the pathological demand avoidance people. This is where I'm losing my thread slightly. So it was about what's their experience. So it's a kind of a bit of a lottery, I think, in some ways. And I think some of it is to do with the adaptation, the bulldozer or the wallflower. But some people with autism present as incredibly cool. And some people with autism present as very much the opposite. So you know, I think a lot of people who are, you know, I'm thinking about kind of, you know, some. One of the reasons that we use the word cool is, you know, somebody that's cool is not. So used in terms of the 5-factor personality model, they would be, in a way, they would be quite low in what they call agreeableness, which means that they give off an air of confidence because they don't try too hard to be nice or to be liked. Okay, and that can be a choice, or it can be a default. So I think some people with autism can be like that, so they can be quite taciturn, they can be quite non-reactive, and if they're in a you know, if they happen to kind of strike lucky and get themselves into a kind of cool genre, like being a DJ or a musician or something like that, and that also if they kind of dress as, you know, autistic people often do in a very unique way, that can come across as being really cool. And on the other hand, you know, you can have people, you know, the autistic, you know, the classic thing when I was growing up was train spotters, you know, and I used to hang out with the train spotters. I wasn't into train spotting, but they were the kind of, you know, the only people I could kind of relate to, I guess, in a way, even though I kind of, the train stuff kind of left me cold. So it's interesting. So part of the experience of an autistic person is you can, you know, if you can get into a niche and you're a little bit of a bulldozer, and you've, you know, and you strike lucky, you can become super cool, or you can become, you know, super nerdy, awkward, low social status. So you can be either end of the sort of social status hierarchy, if that kind of makes sense. So I think, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think a lot of autistic people can have a really, really nice life experience, because often they, in some cases, they can be kind of oblivious to a lot of the nuances that bugger. What was an interesting Freudian slip? A lot of the nuances that bug neurotypical people can go over the top of their head. So that in some ways it can make life simpler. And I've known some people that are really into their special interest, which we talked about in the last video, and have friends that are into that special interest, and spend a lot of time doing things that revolve around that, and they have a fantastic life. So again, I suppose that question really, it's like, they say you've seen one autistic person, it's many different life experiences, so it can be something that cushions you from some of the anxieties of life, the social anxieties, or it can be something that actually cripples you with the social anxieties of life, loneliness and awkwardness. It's interesting. I could talk about that for a long time, really. It's my special interest. So Anuja Records. So Asta is one of my big supporters out in India. Big thoughts and love to all the people in India who are going through a horrific time with COVID. They've also been going through a horrific time politically, haven't they? There's some really kind of political changes going on in India at the moment. Thoughts to people suffering in India. So what's the difference between autistic versus normal behaviour? I kind of think we probably covered that one in some of the other answers. I hope I have. So really often people on the autistic spectrum are often eccentric, sometimes boring, sometimes fascinating, but different, and will often think differently, and will often think more creatively, and come at things from a different angle. So how to deal with children with autism, and can they lead normal lives? That's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I suppose it begs another question: is what do we mean by a normal life? And would somebody with autism want to be normal? Often normality, is something that terrifies us. We really kind of don't like normality, which is why, I always maintain that, there's a very high proportion of people on the autistic spectrum in subcultures. So people that go and live a completely different life. So my guess is that communities like furries and things like that would have a massively high proportion of people with autism. Things like battle reenactment, wargaming, stuff like that. Often, so really, autistic people are the great hobbyists of the world. But also they can kind of get into real niche things. So often really not wanting to be normal, but wanting to kind of find a community where they're normal in an abnormal way, if you like. And I'm not saying that with any kind of judgment or whatever. So all the kind of subcultures that you get, like like furries or even like goths and stuff like that would have a high proportion of people who are on the autistic spectrum. I guess, so can they lead a normal life? Can they lead a good and happy life? Yes. Can they lead a normal life? Yes, because, I would say, there's a certain number of people that are diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum, but probably that's the tip of an iceberg. Loads more people that are, and don't even know it, and they get by quite happily. Particularly, I think the ones that have forceful personalities, So yes, really, but often they don't want to, I suppose, is the answer. And I think it was. So it's getting a bit dark, so I find it hard to see my notes. How to deal with children with autism. So I don't know if that's a question about parenting or looking after children in some other kind of context. With a lot of patience Now check out one of Gwendoline's videos. I think I may have actually put it on one of my playlists because I've got some of her videos on my playlist. But there's a famous girl called, I think, Iris Grace, very, very autistic and very artistic. Somebody commented on the previous video that the two often go together. But you know, was very challenging to bring up as a child, you know, because of a lot of anxieties and a lot of very rigid behaviours and things like that. And mother was, you know, very, very patient, but also, you know, quite fierce in supporting her. So yeah, lots of patience. I think the main thing really is educate yourself, because if you can understand why somebody is the way that they are, you kind of stop fighting it. So if you know that, you know, so one of the things, you know, people with autism often really struggle with change. So if you know that and you've got a child that's on the spectrum, you really, you know, go to great pains not to spring anything upon them. And if there were any changes coming along, you'd make a lot of effort to prepare them for the changes and that kind of thing. So the more you know, the more you learn, the more you kind of reevaluate your expectations, so that you're not pushing water uphill. You're kind of accepting that that's the way that they are. So you know, I think, you know, a lot of people try and bully their children out of their autistic behaviours. So acceptance, really, and a good example, I guess, of kind of acceptance is, you know, things like stimming. So there's something called stimming, which people with autism often do, and I've talked about that in other videos. And stimming is often, it's like a physical movement. So sometimes it can be a verbal noise or an utterance. I tend to have vocal stims. There's things that certain phrases that I repeat out loud to myself. It's called stimming because it's short for stimulation. But that's kind of a partial misnomer. So one of the things that people with autism often do is that this behaviour, which might be some kind of movement, might be like appear like a tick, or it might be, you know, a certain movement. Often, you know, it can be an awkward or strange movement or action. So I used to work with someone who was actually had quite a big major learning disability, but was autistic, and he used to put his arms out at arm's length and then rub his hands together gleefully. That was his stim. So people stim either when they need to crank themselves up a bit, as in stimulation, or when they're anxious and they need to kind of self-soothe. And what I tend to do with vocal stims is when I feel socially awkward. It's usually when I come away from an interaction with somebody and I feel a bit uncomfortable, and then I'll kind of stim, and it's just certain kind of phrases that I repeat to myself. So a good example of how to, you know, look after autistic children is not try and stop that, because that's actually a behaviour that's serving them. Now obviously there's an issue about, you know, you have to kind of prepare your child for the outside world and how the outside world will treat them. So if their stim is something that's going to draw unwelcome and possibly dangerous attention towards them as they get into adult life, then, you know, maybe you do need to look at that. But generally speaking, you wouldn't try and stop somebody from stimming unless there was a good reason. You wouldn't just do it because it's odd, or, you know, you wouldn't just try and make them normal, make them stop just to be kind of normal. You would accept that. So I guess, yeah, so the answer is, I think, what I would say for looking after kids with autism is self-education is learn as much as you possibly can about autism, but also learn as much as you possibly can about your child and how they express it in their own unique way, because it will be unique and they'll have certain ways. And there are things that there are things that you need to help your child overcome so that they can lead a full life and not be too limited, and there are things where you have to fly the white flag and say that's just the way they are. And I think it's the other important thing is about knowing the difference, really. Because, you know, if you have a child that's you know, got quite a high IQ but some autistic tendencies, then, you know, they have a great potential in life. You know, they could go off and be a university professor, but if you don't coach them in any social norms or social skills, then they may never have the confidence or the ability to go out and do that. But on the other hand, if you kind of challenge them too much and take away, you know, behaviours that make them feel safe, then you'll do more harm than good. So there we go. I think I've got to the end. Oh no, one more. which I might do. So we're coming up to the 30-minute mark. So I might come back to Richard Monroe's question about the vaccination debate. Asked me, I didn't write the question down verbatim, but it was about, you know, what evidence have I seen that the vaccination, this is about the was it MMR, isn't it? Measles, mumps, rubella combined vaccination that's given to children, and lots of people believe that it causes autism, and lots of people vehemently believe that it doesn't, and it's, you know, it's a very polarized debate. So I will come back to that one, so we can keep this one within the 30 minutes. It's a nice kind of reasonable chunk. I've probably lost most of you by now already. I'll test you later by asking questions about what you thought of the last thing that I said. So I mean, I could talk about this forever. So what that means as well is, because we can do a part 3, is you can ask more questions, we can have some discussion, you can say more in the comments, you can disagree with me, you can share some examples, we can have a bit more of an interactive thing going on. So thank you very much, thank you for watching. Please give me a like, please show my channel lots of love, because my channel, it really wants to show lots of love to a lot of people. Really, this channel's about helping people in various ways, even though I kind of, you know, come about it in a funny way sometimes. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Back with more. Talk to you soon. Rangi Mario.